The family lunch. My parents smirked. Tomorrow we're moving into your apartment. No excuses. The daughter they always exploited just smiled and answered, "All right. But make sure you bring 860 kelvins by morning." Their faces instantly went pale. The clatter of dishes and low hum of conversation filled the restaurant on Broughton Street. My parents sat across from me, shoulders squared, eyes sharp, with a secret. Already decided. My father leaned forward, lips curling into a smirk. "Tomorrow, we're moving into your apartment. No excuses." The words slid across the table like a blade. My mother nodded, satisfied, to their left. My sister Lena raised her glass, her boyfriend smirking beside her as if they had already unpacked their boxes in my living room. I set my fork down and folded my napkins slowly. Not because I was calm, but because I had trained myself to appear that way. My name is Claire Whitmore. I'm 30 years old. And for most of my life, I've been the daughter expected to manage everything. The one who held things together while Lena was celebrated for falling apart beautifully. But I am no longer the girl patching leaks and shelving secondhand books. I built a health tech startup, from sleepless nights and diner. Coffee wrote code until my hands shook, and learned that survival could be turned into strategy. That apartment, they thought they could claim it wasn't just an address. It was the first key that belonged only to me. The deed was signed with no one else's name. The one place where silence didn't mean punishment, but peace. I watched Delina lean closer to Brian, whispering, like victory was hers. My parents expected me to argue, to crumble, to yield. Like always. Instead, I let the pause settle until even the waiter hesitated near the table. "That's fine," I said evenly. "Just bring $860. 000 by morning." Their faces drained of color, and the table stilled long before that lunch in Savannah. I had already learned what it meant to stand in the background. Lena was the gifted one. At least that's what my parents called her. Even when her report cards were littered with C's. She could stumble through a piano recital and still be applauded for her creativity. I could bring home straight A's and be told I was reliable, as though my achievements were just proof that I could handle more. I remember the year she turned 16. A red convertible appeared in the driveway, with a bow on top. My father proudly patted the hood, as if he'd placed a crown on her head. I was 14 then, clutching a stack of thrift store books my mother had picked up for $1 a box. They told me it would toughen me to read what others had discarded. That word tough became my inheritance. Tough enough to walk to school while Lena drove past music, blaring. Tough enough to cook dinner when my parents stayed late at gallery openings. Tough enough to patch the leaky sink while she laughed with friends in the backyard. Whenever I asked why, the answer was the same. Lena needed support. I could manage. It was a strange kind of love. The kind that kept me busy instead of safe. I learned to carry groceries in silence with the same practiced hands. When Lena borrowed the money I earned babysitting, I knew it wouldn't return. When I asked, she called me stingy, and my parents nodded along, as though my protest proved her right. Somewhere in those years, resentment began to simmer quietly, like water left on low heat. I didn't shout or rebel. I simply faded into corners, learned to survive on the edges, and memorized the map of every doorway that could lead me out. That was the soil I grew from. Praise poured on her. Pressure pressed on me. And it shaped the woman who would one day look across a restaurant table and refuse to yield. By the time I turned 18, I thought I had found my way out. A letter from London arrived with a university crest at the top, and words that made my hands tremble. Partial scholarship awarded. It wasn't full, but it was enough to make the impossible seem within reach. I carried that letter around like proof that the years in the shadows had not been wasted for a few weeks. I let myself dream. I pictured the times at sunrise libraries with shelves higher than I could touch. And a city where no one knew me? Only as Lena's older sister. I began collecting brochures, circling courses in economics and data science, sketching a life where my worth was measured by something other than endurance. Then the phone rang. One humid afternoon, its shrill tone cutting through the house. My mother's voice was calm but heavy. Lena was in the hospital. Nothing fatal, but serious enough to bring bills my parents couldn't cover. She's too young to help, my father said when I offered the word scholarship. His voice sharpened. This time it must be you. I folded the letter into a drawer and never opened it again. London became a ghost. I could only visit in silence at night. Instead of memorizing flight times, I memorized price tags. I rang up groceries under humming fluorescent lights, my apron stiff with starch, and counted coins into jars labeled tuition, rent, and survival. My parents thanked me once, briefly, as though it were an administrative duty completed. Then they shifted their attention back to Lena's new painting, hanging it in the living room, as if it were a family heirloom. I stood there, arms aching from a double shift, watching them applaud her brushstrokes, while my own sacrifices disappeared into thin air. Something hardened in me after that. I stopped auditioning for their praise. Instead, I opened a small savings account in my own name, depositing every extra dollar, no matter how small. I didn't tell anyone. It was the first secret I ever kept from them. A quiet rebellion disguised as practicality. I had given up on London, but I wouldn't give up the idea of leaving. After London slipped away, I buried myself in what was left of work, and study days blurred into one another. Classes in the morning, part-time jobs through the afternoon, and coding late into the night. My desk was littered with second-hand textbooks, notebooks full of equations, and half-drained cups of coffee that had gone cold before I ever finished them. Survival became a calculation. Tuition balanced against rent. Groceries weighed against the bus fare. I lived inside spreadsheets, teaching myself to stretch a single paycheck into a month of meals and lab fees. While Lena posted pictures of galleries and rooftop parties, I posted nothing. I didn't have time for appearances. I was too busy keeping my head above water. It was during one of those long nights in the campus library that I met Daniel. His laptop screen flickered as he muttered at the keyboard. A pile of repair tools scattered beside him. He fixed computers for gas, money for textbooks, sometimes for food. We traded stories over vending machine coffee, the bitter taste softened by his dry humor. Where others had called me stubborn, Daniel called me relentless. And for the first time, the word didn't feel like a criticism. We studied side-by-side deadlines, chasing us like storm sirens. Cheap tacos became our luxury dinners. Shared earbuds filled the silence with music when words felt too heavy. He didn't pity me for the sacrifices I had made. He understood because he was making the same ones. The Savannah startup scene was small but restless. A handful of offices tucked into historic buildings, where ceilings leaked and dreams felt bigger than the rent. I joined as an intern, the youngest face in a room of mismatched desks and flickering lights. We built prototypes that looked ugly but worked, bribing testers with pizza and sheer optimism. Failure was constant, but it didn't scare me. I had failed bigger things already. Dreams, scholarships, approval. This was just code. It could be rewritten. Each morning when the city was still wrapped in fog, I walked to class with a laptop in my bag and a ledger in my mind. Sleep was a luxury I rarely touched. Progress wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, measured in lines of code. Shifts survived and coffee cups emptied before dawn. At 27, I signed papers that felt heavier than anything I had ever held. The one-bedroom apartment in Savannah Starland District wasn't grand by anyone else's standards. The kitchen tiles were cracked in 2 places, and the closet barely fit more than a week's worth of clothes. But when the realtor handed me the keys, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time, no one else's name was on the deed. The apartment was mine. Every square foot, every creak of the old floorboards, every shaft of light that poured through the east-facing window each morning. I remember standing in that light with my boxes still sealed, breathing in the scent of pain and possibility. After years of borrowed spaces and compromises, I finally had a door I could lock and know no one else had the right to open. Daniel helped me haul in furniture, mostly Craigslist finds and hand-me-downs. We laughed when the couch got stuck in the stairwell, sweating through the July heat until a neighbor offered an extra push. By the time we collapsed on the floor that night, surrounded by cardboard and pizza crusts, the apartment already felt like freedom. That feeling didn't last long. My parents insisted on touring my office at the startup, where I'd earned equity. They walked the halls slowly, touching the desks, glancing at the white bars covered in valuable code. But instead of pride, their questions came sharp and precise. How much are your shares worth now? What's the valuation? Not once did they say they were proud. Not once did they ask how I was sleeping or eating. They looked at me like an asset to be audited. Later that week, Aunt Carol called me over for coffee in her garden. She had always been softer, less rehearsed than the rest of the family. She stirred sugar into her mug before she spoke, her voice low. Their drowning-era credit cards, second mortgages, Lena's studio fees. Your sister spending money like it grows on trees. She sighed. And they're already eyeing you as the safety net. I sat there in the fading light, the scent of jasmine thick in the air, realizing that the apartment I had seen as my sanctuary might soon become their solution. The lock on my door was sturdy, but locks only hold when boundaries are respected. One evening, as I returned to my parents' house to drop off some papers, Aunt Carol had asked me to deliver. I paused in the hallway outside the kitchen. Their voices carried low, but sharp enough to catch. We'll move into Iris Place, my father said, as if it were already settled. Save rent. It's only fair. The words landed heavier than any slammed door. My mother murmured agreement. And in that instant, memories rushed back with brutal clarity. Babysitting money that disappeared into Lena's pockets. The scholarship I surrendered so hospital bills could be paid. The groceries rang under fluorescent lights while she danced under confetti. I felt the same dull ache in my chest. The same reminder that in their eyes, my role had never been a daughter. I was a resource fallback plan. B. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at my apartment. Desk. Laptop open. Ledger pages, spreading like scars across the screen. For years, I had tracked sacrifices like an accountant. Coins counted. Dreams deferred. Debts absorbed. But staring at those columns now, I realized I could add a new category. Not what I owed them, but what I owed myself. A week later, I met Patrick Whittaker, a lawyer recommended quietly by one of Daniel's colleagues. He was calm, deliberate, with a way of asking questions that felt like carefully placing bricks into a foundation together. We sketched contingencies, a trust lock to secure my equity. No trespass clauses filed with the city. Airtight agreements that transformed my savings into a fortress. He explained buyout conditions. If anyone tried to claim rights to my property, the figure would stand at $860. Ling ling ling. Not a dime less. Every document I signed felt like a stone laid into a wall I wished had been there when I was a child. When the final page was notarized, Patrick looked up and said simply, "Now you can sleep." And for the first time in weeks, I did. The ledger that once bled red now carried a different kind of line protection. Written in ink and law, Magnolius. The bistro was warm with the scent of garlic and fresh bread. Candlelight dancing across polished silverware. I had chosen the place carefully. Neutral ground, with too many witnesses for anyone to raise their voice. Daniel sat beside me, steady as always, his hand brushing mine under the table, and Carol lingered near the end. Quiet but watchful. My father leaned forward first, his tone carrying the weight of a verdict already written. "We've decided," he said, folding his napkin neatly on his lap. "Tomorrow, we're moving into your apartment. It's what families do. No excuses." My mother's smile stretched thin, as if to soften the blow, though her eyes gleamed with certainty across from me. Lena scrolled through her phone before setting it down with a triumphant little smirk. Her boyfriend Brian twirled his pasta slowly, like he was already savoring the taste of rent-free living. I set down my fork, smoothed the crease of my napkin, and let the weight of their expectation hang in the air. For years, I had filled that silence with obedience, with compromise, with sacrifice. They never remembered. Tonight, I let the silence do its own work. Finally, I looked up, voice calm enough to study the flickering candles. "That's fine," I said. "Just bring $860. 000 by morning for a beat." No one moved. Glasses hovered mid-air. Forks froze inches from plates. My father's knees. My mother's smile collapsed like a curtain yanked down. Too soon. Lena's phone slipped from her fingers and clattered against the floor. Brian blinked, his fork dangling between his fingers. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. I simply watched the color drained from their faces, the calculation faltering in their eyes. For once, they weren't looking at me as they fell back. They were seeing the wall I had built, the gate I alone controlled. The silence at that table was louder than any accusation I had ever endured. The silence shattered under the weight of my father's voice. "Selfish," he spat, his napkin hitting the table. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us." My mother's voice rose brittle and wet with false tears. "Ungrateful. We sacrifice so much, and you sit here counting pennies like a stranger?" Lena leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, her smirk curling into a sneer. "You really think you're better than us? Don't you, Ari? Just because you write code and buy yourself a shoebox apartment? You'll never be more than the girl we carried." Her words tried to sting, but they only pulled up memories I had carried to Long London, slipping from my hands as I signed away my scholarship, babysitting money pocketed, and laughed off hours under the humming lights of a grocery checkout, ringing up strangers, while Lena posted her rooftop views and new shoes. My mother's thanks. That lasted less than a breath before turning to applause for Lena's paintings, the list unspoiled in my mind. Not bitter, just precise, like entries in the ledger I'd been keeping since I was a girl. And as each line revealed itself, something I studied, I looked at them without blinking, without flinching, my pulse slow and sure. The storm raged across their faces. Accusations, guilt demain. But thunder is only noise without lightning. I held the strike, and I wasn't handing it over this time. At the end of the table, Aunt Carol shifted her lips, pressed together before she gave a small nod, pride flickering in her eyes. For once, I wasn't the only one holding my ground. The table had changed shape. I wasn't beneath it anymore, carrying the weight. I was sitting level, steady, unshaken, and they were the ones scrambling to fill the silence. By the next morning, the story had already left the restaurant and spilled onto screens. Lena's posts dripped with performative heartbreak photos of her tear-streaked face. captions about betrayal and hashtags, painting me as the greedy sister who had abandoned her family. Old classmates shared her words, adding their own judgments. Some unfriended me outright. Others slid into my messages with questions I had no intention of answering. I muted the noise and went to work. But even the safety of my office didn't hold. By noon, the lobby doors banged open. My father's voice carried before I even saw him. "Where's the letter?" he boomed. "Read," with fury. My mother trailed behind, arms waving as if every gesture was evidence. "We deserve our share," she cried, her words cutting through the hushed murmur of my coworkers. I stepped forward before anyone else could. "This is a workplace," I said, my voice low but steady. "You need to leave." They escalated, voices rising, faces tight with accusation. My cheeks burned under the weight of so many eyes. But I didn't fold. Security moved in, guiding them out, as my mother's wails echoed down the corridor. "You'll regret this, Era," she shouted, her words bouncing off the walls. The quiet afterward felt like a wound, raw and stinging. I closed my office door and called Patrick. His calm tone landed like a stone in water. "The documents are airtight," he assured me. "They have no claim." Relief came slowly, like air, after being underwater too long. That at night I scrolled through my contacts, thumb hovering over familiar numbers before pressing the block. The silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt like oxygen was rediscovered and clean. Months passed, and the storm that once felt endless began to thin. I poured my energy into the startup, long days turning into longer nights. But this time the work didn't feel like survival. It felt like momentum. We signed new clinics, brought on 3 more developers, and filled the office with a quiet hum of people who believed in the same vision. Daniel and I married in a small park along the Savannah River, the water glinting in late afternoon sun. The ceremony was simple wildflowers in mason jars, folding chairs on soft grass, but it was ours. Aunt Carol dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, her shoulders shaking with gentle sobs when I slipped the ring onto Daniel's hand. I didn't think of what I had lost. I thought of everything we had chosen. Meanwhile, the family I once shouldered began to shrink under their own weight. My parents sold the house I grew up in, moving into a modest apartment lined with linoleum floors. Lena's feed grew keter, her boyfriend gone, her art posts replaced by blurred snapshots of small canvases. The thunder that had once rattled me from the inside out now sounded more like a distant storm fading across the horizon. 1 in the evening, I returned home after a late meeting, the air heavy with the smell of rain. I closed the door to my apartment and turned the key, listening as the lock clicked into place. For the first time, it didn't feel like shutting danger out. It felt like sealing peace in the space around me was quiet, steady, entirely my own. Story 2. My parents made me quit Yale to fund my brother's education, saying a girl doesn't need an elite degree. A decade later, after he ruined them financially, they asked me for $500. Ling ling ling. I pulled out papers that left them speechless. "My name's Regina. I'm 28. And I'm the CFO of a tech company that's about to hit unicorn status. I also own a small chain of antique stores that my grandmother left me. I have an older brother, Ethan, who's 3 years older than me. From the outside, we probably seemed like your typical suburban family. 2 kids, a house with a mortgage, family dinners on Sundays. But there was always this weird dynamic in our house. Ethan was the golden child. It didn't matter that his grades were mediocre at best, or that he spent most of his time playing video games and hanging out with his buddies. He was the son, and that meant everything to my parents. Me, I was just the daughter who was supposed to look pretty, help mom in the kitchen, and eventually marry someone decent. I threw myself into my studies not to prove anything to them. I just genuinely loved learning. I was that nerdy kid who actually enjoyed calculus and spent lunch breaks in the library. By junior year of high school, I had a 4.0 gigapascals, was president of the debate team, and tutored kids in math for extra money. My guidance counselor told me I had a real shot at the Ivy League. Ethan, meanwhile, was barely scraping by, with C's and D's. Boys mature later. Mom would say he just needs to find his passion. Dad would add. My parents hired expensive S.A.T. tutors for him, paid for test prep courses, even got him an educational consultant. Basically, someone who would write his college essays for him. They never offered any of that to me. When I asked about S.A.T. prep, my dad said I was smart enough to figure it out on my own. And I did. I studied my ass off. Took practice tests every weekend. Watched free prep videos online. When the acceptance letters started coming in during my senior year, I couldn't believe it. Yale full ride. Need-based financial aid. Plus merit scholarships. The whole package would cover tuition, room and board, even textbooks. All I had to do was maintain my grades and work 10 hours a week in the library. I remember running downstairs with the letter, so excited I could barely breathe. My mom was in the kitchen making dinner. She looked at the letter, smiled this tight little smile, and said, "We talk about it when Dad got home." That should have been my first warning. The conversation didn't happen that night, or the next night. My parents kept putting it off, saying we needed to discuss it as a family when everyone had time. Meanwhile, Ethan's rejection letters kept rolling in. Every single school turned him down, even the state schools he'd applied to as his safeties. My parents were scrambling, making phone calls, trying to figure out what went wrong. Finally, about a week before I was supposed to leave for New Haven, they announced we were having a special family dinner. Mom made a pot roast. Dad opened a bottle of wine. I thought they were finally going to celebrate my achievement. I was so wrong. After at dinner, Dad cleared his throat and started talking about family responsibility and making sacrifices for each other. Then he dropped the BMB. "Regina, we need you to decline the Yale offer," he said, like he was asking me to pass the salt. I laughed. I thought he was joking at first. But his face stayed serious. "We need to focus our family's resources on getting Ethan into college," he continued. "He needs this more than you do. You can go to community college for a couple of years, then transfer somewhere local." My mom jumped in. "A girl doesn't need a prestigious degree. Honey, you're smart. You'll do fine anywhere. But Ethan needs every advantage he can get." I sat there stunned. They wanted me to give up a full ride to Yale, not transfer it to Ethan, because that's not how college admissions work, but just throw it away so they could blow more money trying to buy his way into some private college that would take him. "Are you insane?" I finally managed to say. Dad's face turned red. "Watch your tone. Young lady, we're your parents, and we know what's best for this family. What's best for this family, or what's best for Ethan. Don't be selfish." Mom said, "Your brother needs our support right now. He's had your support his whole life. You paid for his tutors, his test prep, everything. I worked for this on my own. And now you want me to just give it up?" The argument escalated quickly. Dad started yelling about ungrateful daughters and how they'd wasted money sending me to a good high school. Mom cried and said I was tearing the family apart. Ethan just sat there, smirking like he knew he'd already won. Finally, Dad stood up and gave me an ultimatum. "You declined that offer by Monday. Or you packed your bags and got out of this house." I went in my room and cried for hours. Then I called my grandma. Dad's mom, who lived about an hour away. Grandma Ruth had always been different from the rest of the family. She was sharp, independent, ran her own antique business. Since Grandpa died 15 years ago, she listened to me sob through the whole story, then said 5 words that changed everything. "Pack your things. Come here." I left the next morning while everyone was still asleep. I just threw my clothes in garbage bags, grabbed my laptop and important documents, and drove to Grandma's house in my beat-up Honda Civic. Grandma Ruth was waiting on the porch with coffee and toast. She didn't say much, just hugged me and showed me to the guest room. Over the next few days, she helped me figure out a plan. Yale was off the table. I'd missed the deadline to confirm enrollment while my parents were playing their sick game. But the local community college was still accepting applications. "It's not Yale," Grandma said, "but it's a start. You'll transfer somewhere better when you can." She helped me find a tiny studio apartment near campus, paid the security deposit and first month's rent. I got a job at a diner, working nights and weekends, plus tutoring gigs through the college's learning center. The pay was crap, but I made it work. Those community college years were brutal. I'd go to class all morning, tutor in the afternoon, then work at the diner until 2:00 a.m. I slept maybe 4 hours a night. My diet consisted mainly of leftover food from the diner and instant ramen. But I kept my grades perfect. I had to, if I wanted to transfer somewhere decent. My parents I tried calling a few times in those first months, left voicemails about how I was being dramatic, how I should come home and apologize. I never called back. Ethan sent me a text once, calling me a bastard for abandoning the family. I blocked his number. The only family I was, Grandma Ruth. She'd invite me over for Sunday dinners, always sending me home with a week's worth of leftovers. She'd slip $20 bills into my textbooks when I wasn't looking. When my car broke down, she paid for the repairs and wouldn't let me pay her back. "Family takes care of each other," she'd say. Real family. Anyway, after a year and a half at community college, I applied to transfer to Ohio State. Got in with a partial scholarship. But it wasn't the Ivy League. But it was a real university with a solid business program. I moved to Columbus, got a job at the library, and added a weekend gig as a restaurant hostess. I still barely slept. Still, I lived on ramen. But I was making progress during this time. Grandma would update me on my parents and Ethan. They'd managed to get him into some private college in Pennsylvania. Not prestigious, but expensiva. They took out massive Parent Plus loans, refinanced the house, even dipped into their retirement funds. Ethan could major in business at a school that accepted basically anyone who could pay. 2 years into his college experience, Ethan got expelled. Academic probation turned into academic dismissal. Plus, there was some disciplinary issue involving vandalism at a frat house. My parents tried to appeal, hired a lawyer, but the school wouldn't budge. They scrambled to get him into another school, found some place in Florida that would take him as a transfer student. He lasted 1 semester before dropping out, moved back home, spent his days playing online poker and video games. My parents kept enabling him paying for his expenses, making excuses about how he just needed time to find himself. I graduated from Ohio State Summa Comedy with a degree in finance. Got recruited by a consulting firm in Columbus. The salary wasn't amazing, but it was steady money. More than I'd ever had in my life. I moved into a decent apartment, bought actual furniture instead of milk crates, and started saving every penny I could. My employer offered tuition assistance for graduate degrees, so I started applying to MBA programs. Got into Case Western Reserve with a partial scholarship for 2 years. I worked full-time and went to school at night. It was exhausting, but nothing compared to those community college days. Grandma Ruth was so proud. She came to my MBA graduation, took about 100 photos, and treated me to dinner at the fanciest restaurant in Cleveland. Over dessert? She got serious. "Regina, I need to tell you something." She said, "I'm updating my will, and I want you to know what's in it." I tried to protest. She was only 77 and healthy as a horse. But she waved me off. "I've thought long and hard about this," she continued. "Your parents. What they did to you is unforgivable. They chose favorites, and they chose wrong. Everything I have, the house, my investments, the antique business, it's all going to you." I started crying right there in the restaurant. Not because of the money, but because someone in my family actually chose me. "What about Dad?" I asked. "He's your son." Grandma's face hardened. "He made his choice. He chose to sacrifice one child for another. He doesn't deserve a damn thing from me." She was true to her word. 5 years ago, she had her lawyer draw up the will. She even added something called a cortisol, just a month before she died, confirming her wishes and specifically stating that my parents were being disinherited for their treatment of me. Grandma Ruth went peacefully in her sleep. She was 82. I was devastated. She was the only real family I'd had for the past decade. Though the funeral was awkward as hell, my parents showed up. Of course, along with Ethan. They acted like grieving family members. But I could see them eyeing me, probably calculating what they thought was their share of the inheritance. The reading was scheduled for the following week at the lawyer's office. Mr. Peterson, Grandma's attorney, had sent everyone copies beforehand. But apparently my parents hadn't bothered to read theirs. I'll never forget the look on their faces when Mr. Peterson read the will out loud. "The house is worth about $800. Ling, ling, ling. The investment portfolio, roughly $2 million. The antique business, profitable and growing all to me." Then came the kicker to my son Robert and daughter-in-law, Patricia. I leave the sum of $1 as a reminder of how they valued their own daughter. My dad jumped out of his chair. She wasn't in her right mind. Regina manipulated her. Mr. Peterson, completely unfazed, pulled out another document. Mrs. Ruth Henderson anticipated this reaction. She was examined by Dr. Marcus Webb, a geriatric psychiatrist. 1 month before her death, he certified that she was of sound mind and capable of making legal decisions. The casualty to her will was witnessed by 3 individuals and notarized. Everything is completely legal and binding. I'll read the relevant section. He cleared his throat. I am of sound mind and body as I write this. I know my son will contest this. Let the record show that I am fully aware of what I am doing. Robert chose to abandon his daughter to deny her an education, to threaten her with homelessness, all to favor his son, who has shown no ambition or gratitude. He made his choice. Now I make mine. Regina cared for me, visited me. I loved me when my own son couldn't be bothered. She deserves everything I have to give. My mother started sobbing. How could you do this to us, Regina? We're your parents? You stopped being my parents the day you tried to destroy my future, I said, and walked out. They tried to contest the will. Of course. Hired some ambulance chasers who filed claims about undue influence and mental incapacity. The case went to probate court, where their lawyer argued that I'd isolated Grandma from the family and poisoned her against them. The judge wasn't buying it. Mr. Peterson presented evidence that Grandma had been actively running her business until the week she died, that she'd had regular contact with friends and neighbors, and that the whistle had been consistent for 5 years. He also submitted affidavit from people who'd witnessed my parents' behavior toward me, including my high school guidance counselor, who remembered them refusing to pay for my SAT prep while spending thousands on Ethan. The judge dismissed their case. The whole probate process took about 9 months. But eventually everything was transferred to me. I sold Grandma's house. I couldn't bear to live there without her. And invested. Most of the proceeds conserved. She took about $300. 0, 0, 0, and established a scholarship fund for young women from low-income families who showed academic promise. Set it up with an independent board and clear, transparent criteria, so no one could ever accuse me of playing favorites. The antique business was trickier. I didn't know anything about antiques, but I knew about business. I hired a manager who'd worked with Grandma for years, someone who knew the inventory and the customers. Then I modernized things, set up an online store, improved the inventory management system, even started doing Instagram marketing to attract younger collectors within 18 months. I turned it into a small chain, 3 locations across Ohio, plus the online store that ships nationwide. The manager runs day-to-day operations while I handle the financial strategy and expansion plans. It's actually pretty profitable. Turns out there's good money in antiques, if you know what you're doing. My career was taking off. 2. After my MBA, I joined a tech startup as a financial analyst, worked my way up to finance director, then got poached by another startup that was scaling fast. They just closed their Series D funding around $60 million and needed a CFO who could handle rapid growth. At 28, I was younger than most CFOs, but I had the credentials and the drive. The board liked that I'd built something from nothing, that I understood what it meant to bootstrap and struggle. During all this success, my parents' situation was falling apart. Ethan had racked up huge gambling debts. Online poker turned into sports betting. Then casino trips. Then borrowing from sketchy people who charged insane interest. He'd also maxed out credit cards, taken out personal loans, even stolen money from my parents' accounts. They were drowning. The house they'd refinanced to pay for Ethan's education was underwater. The retirement funds were gone. Credit cards maxed out. They were in their late 50s with no savings and mountains of debt. About 6 months into the probate process, before the estate was even settled, they reached out to me. Mom called from a number I didn't recognize, crying about how they were going to lose the house. "We need $500. Ling, ling, ling," she said. "Just as a loan. We'll pay you back within a month. I promise the bank is going to foreclose otherwise." "Where would you get $500? 0 inches a month to pay me back?" I asked. "We'll figure it out. We're family. Regina. Family helps each other." I actually laughed. Family. Like when you helped me by trying to force me to give up Yale. Like when you threw me out for refusing to sacrifice my future for Ethan. That was different. We were trying to do what was best for Ethan. Always for Ethan. "Well, why don't you ask your precious son for the money? He doesn't have it. You know he doesn't have it. You got everything from Grandma. And we got nothing. You got exactly what you deserved," I said and hung up. I tried everything. Dad sent emails threatening legal action, claiming that as the only son, Ethan had rights to Grandma's estate. Their lawyer, a different one this time, sent a letter demanding I settle with them to avoid a lawsuit. I forwarded everything to Mr. H.N. for Peterson, who sent back a beautifully worded legal response that basically told them to pound sand after they lost the court case. Things got even worse for them. The house was foreclosed on. They had to move into a crappy apartment on the outskirts of Dayton. Dad, who'd been a regional manager making decent money, I couldn't find work in his field anymore. Age discrimination is real. So he took a job as a night security guard at a warehouse. Mom works as a cleaner at an office building. They're basically starting over at 60, living paycheck to paycheck. Ethan fled to Texas to escape his creditors. Last I heard, he was working under the table at a moving company and sleeping on someone's couch. The people he owed money to in Ohio were not the kind of people you want to mess with. So he can't come back. Sometimes mutual acquaintances tell me I should feel bad for them, that I should help them out. Since I have so much now, these people don't understand what it was like to be 18 years old. And have your parents tell you that your dreams don't matter because you're just a girl. They don't understand what it's like to work until 2 a.m. at a greasy diner. Then get up at 6:00 for class. Running on no sleep and cheap coffee. All because your family decided you were worth less than your brother. I don't feel bad for them. They made their choices. They bet everything on the wrong horse, and they lost. They could have had 2 successful children, but they decided one was expendable. Now they have none. The scholarship fund I set up has already helped dozens of young women pay for college girls, who remind me of myself. Smart, driven, but born into families that don't value their potential. Every year I read their applications, their essays about their dreams and struggles. And I think about how different my life could have been if my parents had just loved me as much as they loved my brother. I'm doing well now. Really well. The startup I work for is probably going public next year, and my equity stake will be worth several million. The antique business continues to grow. We're looking at locations in Pennsylvania and Michigan. I own a nice condo in downtown Columbus, drive a Tesla, and can afford to travel wherever I want to. But the best part, I did it all without them. Every success, every achievement, every dollar earned. None of it is thanks to them. It's all despite them. Last month, I got a message from Ethan on LinkedIn. He was trying to reconnect, talking about how we should put the past behind us, how family is important. I looked at his profile. Basically, empty, just says he's seeking opportunities. I didn't respond, but I did notice he'd viewed my profile multiple times. He can see my title, CFO at a successful tech company. He can see my education, the Ohio State degree, and the MBA he never got. He can see everything he could have had if he'd actually worked for it. Instead of expecting it to be handed to him, my parents are still in that crappy apartment. A friend who still lives in Dayton told me she saw my mom at the grocery store looking tired and old, carefully counting coupons. Part of me wonders if they ever think about that night, 10 years ago when they gave me an ultimatum over pot roast. Do they realize that was the moment they lost their daughter? Do they understand that their favoritism cost them everything? I doubt it. People like that never admit they were wrong. They'll go to their graves believing that I'm the selfish one, that I abandoned them, that I stole what was rightfully theirs. They'll never understand that they abandoned me first. The thing is, I should thank them. Their cruelty made me strong. Their rejection taught me to rely on myself. Their favoritism showed me what not to become. If they'd supported me, maybe I would have gone to Yale, gotten a good job, and lived a comfortable life. But I never would have fought as hard as I did. I never would have appreciated every small victory, every dollar saved, every goal achieved. Grandma Ruth saw it all. She watched them destroy our relationship for the sake of their golden child, and she made sure they paid for it. Not out of spite, but out of justice. She gave her estate to the grandchild who earned it, not the one who expected it. Sometimes people ask me if I'll ever forgive them. The truth is, I don't think about them enough to forgive them. They're just people who used to be in my life, like old classmates whose names I've forgotten. The opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. And I'm completely indifferent to them now. My life is full without them. I have friends who became my chosen family. I have mentors from business school who still guide me. I have colleagues who respect me for my abilities, not my gender. I have the scholarship recipients who send me letters about their successes. their graduations, their first jobs. These are my people now. The scholarship fund will outlive all of us. Long after my parents are gone, long after I'm gone, young women will be going to college because of what Grandma Ruth and I built from the ashes of their favoritism. That's a legacy worth having. So that's my story. The girl who was supposed to give up Yale for her deadbeat brother is now a CFO and business owner worth millions. The parents who said a girl doesn't need a prestigious education are working minimum wage jobs in their 60 seconds. But the brother who was supposed to be the success of the family is hiding from creditors in another state. Karma. Justice. I don't know what to call it. All I know is that I won not because I got the money or the success, but because I proved them wrong. I proved that I mattered. I proved that investing in me would have been the smartest thing they ever did. Their loss. My gain. And I sleep perfectly fine at night.